top one.
All right, we're going to keep moving along with our conversations. I would like to introduce Dr. Lance Gunderson, the founder of Regen Ag Labs, and we'll turn it over to Lance.
Is that high enough? No, yes, high enough. You all heard it. Jennifer told me to put it high. Get high. How's that? Better? All right. How's everybody doing? Great. Good. Yeah, do you have a question? I was told I have to answer and repeat all questions. Candy will hold me to it. All right. By quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Haney test? Good, because I'm not going to go through the Haney test today about how it works. I know Bryce is like, oh, thank God. Not going to go through that, but at any point in time, if you have a question about what am I talking about, what am I referring to, just stop me and I'll go through it. Today, Bryce talked about mathematics on the farm, his farm, economics. I wish I would have known all that too, Bryce, when I decided to borrow the amount of money I had to borrow. I am not my own bank, and my bank's ruthless. I'm going to go through, we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to actually just walk through the steps I take when somebody says, interpret this test for me. I'm going to just go through the steps. I'm going to tell you what I look at and what direction I'm going to go. I'm going to show you a quote, it's not a hypothetical example, it's a real sample. I'm going to show you a report. I'm going to break it into pieces. I'm going to go through that one. And then we've got a couple of reports from a couple of you in this room, actually. So these are, you can say, well, okay, great, you interpreted this sample, I think it was from Ohio. Look, the steps for interpretation on this are the same. It's the same process. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day, when we get to the, okay, I think I understand what I'm looking at, what's next? That doesn't mean that we're going to make the same recommendations for the person who's in Ohio versus Central Kansas, right? So work within your context and around your goals that you have on your operation. But no, you are not supposed to be able to read all those numbers. This is the Haney test report. It's a one-page report from Regen Ag Lab. I'm going to break this apart. So this is the example. I took the grower information out of this up here. This is from November of 2022. I do know this came out of Ohio. So everyone says, where do I start? This is the first place to start. This number right here is your soil health calculation number. It is the most meaningless number on the report. And that's where we're going to start. I say meaningless because the number by itself honestly doesn't mean anything. I asked Rick Haney, I said, Rick, why did you create this number? And he said, because after about the 10,000th phone call where somebody said, I want you to take all of this information and condense it into one number, that's what he did. So he took a bunch of the stuff off of his test, condensed it into one number, and said, here you go. But it's where we're going to start, and this is why. If this score is below 7, it tells me that I've gotten some problems. Where do I look next? Okay? So I know this one is 23, but I'm taking you through the steps. It's the same steps. So, if this soil health score is below 7, the first thing I'm going to look at is soil respiration right here. Soil respiration makes up a majority of this score. The reason it makes up a majority of the score is because soil respiration by itself tells us a lot about other soil properties. So, I've got a score of 6. I look at my respiration, it's 30. You scratch your head and you go, why is my respiration 30? I've got good moisture out here. It's not January. Why is my respiration 30? Next thing I'm going to look at. Water extractable organic carbon. If you don't want to remember that, think of this. Food. That is the food that the microorganisms are eating. It's what they have access to. So, if my food is low, below 100 parts per million, that is going to limit how much the microbes can eat. And all you're measuring is, on respiration, is how much are they eating. When we eat carbon, we exhale carbon dioxide. Microorganisms are doing the same thing. They do not do what I do, which is store carbon. I'm good at storing carbon. Yes. Bacteria, fungi do not store carbon in that way. So if they're active and they want to be active, they constantly have to eat. It's much like my 7-year-old son. They eat constantly. Okay. If I want to understand that relationship, I'm going to look at this number right here. MAC. Now, I apologize. There are a ton of acronyms on this report because it's one of two ways. Either put everything on a single page, which, yes, I am told that the report needs to be on a single page, or and deal with acronyms, or I put it out on 3 pages and we can spell everything out. MAC, microbially active carbon. It's a percentage. Think of it like this. What percentage of the available food are the microbes consuming? Think of it more like a budget item. You heard Bryce talk about you looking at, this is my budget. This is my expenses. If I've got 300 parts per million carbon and my respiration is 150, then my percent MAC is 50%, right? Now, here's what we learned from that number. My brother, love him to death, he is the tightest person I've ever met when it comes to money. You would think the guy is making $10,000 a year the way he likes to live. So if he makes $5,000 a month and spends $500 a month, he's spending 10% of his income. Is it a lack of income that is stopping him from spending more? No. So if our percent MAC number is low, meaning I've got a ton of food to eat, but my microbes are eating very little, are they doing that because they don't have enough to eat? We got to look somewhere else. There's a different reason. If my carbon number is 100 and my respiration is 80 and I want it to be 140, then I need to increase the amount of carbon into that system that they can eat, right? Is everyone following me, or have I lost everybody so far? I'm just getting started, so if we're lost, say so. The goal then, when everybody says to me, what should that carbon number be? I don't know, how much money should I earn? You say, well, more is better. Well, Yeah, more money, more problems, right? So, what are you doing with it? In this case, we are going to look at balance of this related to demand. Write this down if you're taking notes. We want that percent MAC number to be somewhere between 50% and 80% most of the time. If it's below 50%, I've got a different problem. If it's above 80%, and yes, by the way, it can be above 100%. And say, how is that possible? I don't know. Have you ever spent more money than you earn in a month?
That's farming above your means.
Yeah, farming above your means. Or building a building above your means for a while.
There you go.
How do you make that happen? Well, when that happens, you borrow money. When microbes borrow carbon, where do they get it? Aggregation. What is the stuff that's holding together that aggregation? What do we collectively call it? Big umbrella. Organic matter. Yep. So soil organic matter is the savings account for carbon in your system. It is supposed to be stable. It is supposed to be there. And much like Bryce said, listen, you can borrow from your money market account, but you got to pay it back. When the microbes borrow it out of the soil organic matter, we lose aggregation, and the system starts to feed on itself. That is what has happened across most of the crop acres in the country. Almost anywhere in the country, you look at where row crop production has happened, that is what has happened over the last 60, 70, 80 years. So, we don't want the microbes to eat above their means. We want this number in between 50 and 80%. Now, don't panic. There are certain times of the year where, guess what? The microbes eat more than what they have. That's okay. Much like there are times of the year where our expenses as a business are higher than our income. February is a great example of that for me. But it's the average, and you want that number to be between 50 and 80%. So, back to this example specifically, I take one look at this number. Right here, I know that I do not need to look at this number. I know this number's high because of this. Food plays into this number, directly and indirectly. I don't really need to look at the food. What I'm going to look at is say, well, I'm at 24, that's pretty darn good. And again, how high can that number be? It depends on where you're at in the country, depends on your climate, your soil type. But with a number that high, that's kind of like saying, you know, after you've made your first several $100 million, are you too concerned about the hundreds of thousands rounding errors? I mean, you know, you just kind of go, yeah, okay, close enough. Once that number gets high enough, you kind of go, okay, I don't need to look at the details of this. Now, I'm not saying that you've made it. It's not a finish line. Now it's maintaining it, right? This number's 24. I'm going to look at percent MAC, and I'm going to say, okay, the one thing I might need to adjust is do I need to, where's that carbon number relative to my respiration? And do I need to increase my management intensity when it comes to making sure I've got carbon coming into the system? In this case, no. And I want this, and we'll talk about this in greater detail, I want this carbon to nitrogen ratio balanced between 10 to 1 and 12 to 1. This one is 11 to 1. If I get below 8 to 1, I've got really high protein feed for the microbes, not enough carbon energy. How many of you got livestock? By the way, kids count as livestock. Yeah. So, I have said this, some of you have heard this, I joked around. The first time my ex-wife left to travel and left me at home with my 2 children, she said, "Did you feed them breakfast?" said, I'm not, yeah, I took care of it. We had Coca-Cola and Pixie Sticks. And of course she starts yelling, and now we're divorced. And, and it's, look, I didn't feed him Coca-Cola and Pixie Sticks. Where I'm getting at there is that that's all carbon, right? It's all energy, it's all carbon, there's no nutrition in it. Really low, really high C to N ratio. They loved it, by the way. They bounced off the walls for about 3 hours and then they crashed. So for supper, we had 2 Flintstone vitamins and called it a day.
There you go.
230% of all the nutrition you need in a day. Look, as producers, we've been taught to manage the Flintstone vitamins very well. That has been the sole focus of ag retail. How do we put in the right nutrients, the zincs, the coppers, the borons, the nitrogens, the phosphorus? Those are all Flintstone vitamins. Microbes don't eat Flintstone vitamins. Plants do. Now I say that because microbes, just like the rest of us, we don't live just on carbon. We need that fertility. We need the nutrients as well. It is a balance between the two. We just never talked about it with crop production because where do plants get their carbon? It's not a trick question. From the sun, where they get their energy to capture the carbon. What's in the atmosphere? CO2. So we don't fertilize carbon, but it is the #1 nutrient requirement of a plant. Does anybody know what number 2 is?
Water.
Say again. Nitrogen. Nitrogen's not in the top 3. Water contains both of them, Bryce. Hydrogen and oxygen. And then nitrogen, right? The plants get those from the atmosphere, and then they get water to get their oxygen and hydrogen. So in this example, I want to go back to the hypothetical. This score is, imagine it as 3.76. It's low. I look at my percent MAC and say, well, this is okay. What could be causing my respiration to be low in that hypothetical example? If it's not a lack of food, remember I talked about the lack of food, first place you start. If it's not a lack of food, the reason I put these up above, this is the very next place to look. Does anybody out here have high pH? How high, Bryce?
8.3 probably.
8.3. Yeah. pH on both sides of neutral affect respiration. One of those is easier to address than the other, right? Low pH is easier to address with lime application than high pH. You would go broke putting on all the elemental sulfur you needed to lower an 8.3 pH to 7.2. Those are some limitations with high pH soils, but it's important to understand those limitations. Much like no matter how much money I dump into a Ford Taurus, I will never turn it into a Formula One race car. I can go broke trying, but you'll never do it. Has anyone ever seen me dunk a basketball? I've never seen it either. I could practice all day long. My limitation is about a 12-inch vertical and 220 pounds. Okay? So I look at pH. If my respiration's low and carbon's not my problem, I look at pH. If my pH is between 6 and 7.8, I'm going to look at soluble salts. Quick lesson about salts. Every nutrient in your soil is a salt. It is not sodium chloride. All of them are salts. Some of them are soluble in water. Some of them are not. Nitrate, sulfate, sodium, and chloride are your 4 big soluble salts. If you put 300 pounds of nitrogen on your soil, your soluble salt number will shoot up from 0.2 to 0.8. If you put 200 pounds of phosphorus or 300 pounds of phosphorus on your soil, your soluble salt number will go from 0.2 to 0.23. And the reason I say that is because what is delivering the food to the microbes in the soil? It falls out of the sky. Or in Nebraska, we pump it out of the ground at alarming rates. Water. Now, if you've got a whole bunch of stuff out in that soil that is soluble in water, you just turned that fresh water into what? Salt water. Plants don't like too salty a water, right? Fish, unless you're a saltwater fish. Microbes don't handle salt water either. So I'll give you a real world example of this. And I apologize because you have heard this, and so have you, some of you as well. Years ago, Rick Haney was working at the lab in Temple, Texas. He received a bunch of soil samples, a couple dozen from Minnesota. He analyzed them. This number, water-soluble carbon, averaged close to 400 parts per million. That's 2.5 times the average, by the way. pH is 6.8. Organic matters were double that, 10%. Respiration was less than 10 on all of them. So, Rick swallowed his pride and he said, the lab made a mistake, they reran them. They repeated. He called me and he said, Lance, I don't understand what's going on. Now, there were a couple of things that Rick did not measure originally. One of those was pH and soluble salts. He measured pH. So he sent the samples up to me. We ran them. He also did not run calcium and he did not, sulfur. That was not part of his original test. We ran all of those things. Sulfur was almost 600, 700 parts per million. Calciums were up in the 4,000. Now keep in mind that's on an H3A extract. A traditional extract, those calcium numbers would be pushing 15, 20,000. I immediately called him and I said, ask them why they're putting on so much gypsum. The soluble salt numbers were at 3.5. Now, are you familiar with crop tolerances when it comes to soluble salts? Barley can tolerate a pretty high number on soluble salts, 1.5. Wheat, up to 1.5, maybe even 2. Soybeans, you get anything close to 1, you might as well stop planting soybeans because it's a money pit. They do not tolerate salty soil. So what we were exhibiting is an essentially unlimited amount of food. Organic matters at 10%. Black soil, right? All this stuff. And these guys were using cover crops and manures. The one thing they didn't do was stop putting on gypsum because their agronomist told them they needed the calcium to keep their pH high. So then I had to explain that calcium has nothing to do with pH. It's a coincidence that high pH soils also have high calcium, but it's because of calcium carbonate. Carbonate is what makes your pH high, okay? You could use sodium bicarbonate to raise your pH instead of ag lime. We do not do that because sodium will destroy your soil because it is a soluble salt. We use calcium because it's not very soluble. So, I have answered and interpreted more of these issues from soluble salts than probably any other reason. Now, at the same time, soluble salts can be too low. Soluble salts is an indicator of your overall soil fertility. The higher the number, the more fertile your soil is. Doesn't mean it's more productive, but the higher the fertility. The lower the number, the less fertile it is. I have run soil samples from all 50 states, 46 foreign countries now, done over 500,000 of them for the Haney test alone. And I see it, there was a message that was kind of being thrown out a few years ago. Michael and I talked about it. You can't put on any synthetic fertility, right? It's you got to stay away from all the nutrient applications. And I go, whoa, wait a minute. That's going back to the scenario of feeding your children Coca-Cola and Pixie Sticks. Just because we forgot about carbon at one point doesn't mean it's all about carbon now. Because I saw this happen over and over again. I had a gentleman, a specific example in Oklahoma. He said, Lance, our grass production is taking a shot. We're 6th generation grazing operation. We are doing daily moves. We are doing mob grazing. We have interseeded pastures. I mean, they were doing all of the things that people were talking about. And they said, our production is going through the floor. And we ran the test, and I said, well, your available phosphorus is less than 1 part per million. And he says, so what do I do? I said, put phosphorus on. And he said, well, I was told if I put any of that on, I'll kill the microbes. And I said, the entire membrane of a microbe is made up of phospholipids. Have you heard of that test, PLFA? We're not going to talk about it today, but PLFA. Those cells require phosphorus. So when you get to a certain threshold of availability, guess what? The microbes aren't feeding the plant phosphorus, they're fighting for it. Right? Now I said, here's the caveat. Don't take that soil test to your co-op and show them that phosphorus number, because they will sell you 400 pounds of phosphorus. And then you will have a different problem. He said, so how much should I put on? I said 40. And then let that go, and then a year later put on 40 again. And then 3 years from now, or 3 years from then, put on 40 again, and then you'll be okay for 10, 12 years. And the argument I get a lot is, well, nobody fertilizes the forest. Correct. Nobody clear cuts that forest and expects to clear cut the same forest again next year with a 10% increase in production. But that's what we expect with ag, right? So I said there is a caveat difference in there. So the reason I'm hammered on this is because I also see examples, countless examples, of the soluble salts is too low. I measured the soil, potassium was 11 parts per million. What do? Put potassium on. Again, not 400 pounds of it, but we gotta manage that. And I know that for a long time we've been clear over here, too much, too often, all the time, a lot of money. But going completely back the other way, depending on the system you're in, can hurt as well. And the test shows you. Okay? And moving on, I should have went to this slide while I said all that, because moving on, if my pH is balanced, my carbon's good, my soluble salts are good, my respiration's still terrible, my soil health score is terrible. Why? That's when we start looking at these numbers. Phosphorus, I said less than 1 part per million. Not a good thing. Potassium, we can get too low. Maybe we completely have no zinc. Microbes require all of those same nutrients, just like we do, just like the crop does. So yes, managing fertility is part of this equation. It's just we're going to take a different approach, and we're not going to take the moron approach. And I'm not calling anybody morons, I'm saying that's the approach. If you're not happy with the output, put more on, right? So we step away from that a little bit. So once I've kind of gone through some of this, I'm sitting down looking at this, trying to identify good areas, problem areas, things to address. I finally get to the nitrogen piece. That is usually where people want to start. And it's funny because I work backwards. I should start with the most meaningless number and let's work towards the most meaningful, most impactful when it comes to economics, when it comes to production. We're going to look at nitrogen. I've got nitrate, I've got ammonium. Both of these are plant available forms. Those are what we call inorganic. When we put on fertilizer, we put it on as ammonium. The microbes convert it to nitrate in the presence of oxygen. We hope the plant takes it up as its ammonium, but a majority of it is taken up as nitrate. We're going to measure on the water extract how much total soluble nitrogen is there. In other words, for every 1% soil organic matter you have, you've got about 1,000 pounds of nitrogen. But it's not useful to you directly. And if you want it to be useful to you, then you have to destroy the organic matter to get it. Any of you have a goal of decreasing soil organic matter? I've asked that, and I ask that question all the time, and I've never had a single grower raise their hand and say, yep. I've got a grower in North Carolina, the average soil organic matter on his farm, and yes, he farms 3,000 acres, is 42%. It is black sand, not peat moss. And he's a young boy, and I asked him, I said, Jay, what are your goals? And he said, I want to increase soil organic matter. Dead straight in the face, and I said, I think you've done a good job. And he said, I haven't done any of this. This is where I started. And that's his goal. He's got 42,000 pounds of nitrogen sitting there in that organic matter in the top 6 inches. Now, we can utilize some of that here and there, but much like borrowing money from yourself, you hope to pay it back. So, how do we determine how much soluble organic N is there? Now, think of this as soluble protein. For those of you with livestock and for those of you that have two-legged livestock, when you feed livestock, what do they digest first? What do they eat? Protein. It's the very first thing they will digest. Who is doing the digestion in a ruminant animal? Bacteria, microbes, right? When presented with a food source, bacteria and fungi will eat soluble protein almost immediately. They will consume all of that in a food source within 5 to 7 days, depending a little bit on temperature and moisture. Fiber, so all that stuff that we're really good at growing, the milo stalks, the wheat stubble, the corn stalks, most of that is cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin, and we say we have a residue problem, you have a biology problem. It's very difficult for them to burn through or decompose all of that material because there's not a lot of protein in it. The protein that the plants produce, we harvest most of that and haul it off. Pound for pound, you all know that soybean residue will disappear much faster than milo, right? It's a much higher protein content. So they're going to eat protein. We get this number by taking the extractable amount and subtracting nitrate and ammonia. Now, for those of you who do quick math, you'll say 49 minus 21.7 is not 29.1. Yes, I know. I can't tell you the number of people that have yelled at me because I don't know how to do math. We extract nitrate and ammonium twice. We only report it once. The reason we extract it twice is because we are taking the same soil sample, scooping it into 2 different flasks, running it through the entire lab process, and then hoping that we didn't screw up and put something out of order. The best way to do that as a quality control is run nitrate on both of those extracts. Because nitrate being soluble, you should get really close to the same number. Okay? That doesn't mean they're always going to be exactly the same, it just means they're close. Now, I've had people say to me, I want you to rerun that nitrate. I'll rerun it. It was 17.4 the first time, it was 17.1 the second time, and I'm told those aren't the same. I said, you're right, they're not the same. It's a difference of 0.6 pounds to the acre, and if you show me a precision applicator that is that good, I will arguably run that thing as many times as you want. So that is where we come up with that number. Organic nitrogen to inorganic nitrogen ratio. Is your system being driven off of protein, soluble protein, biology, or is it being driven off of nitrate, ammonium, and chemistry? Most operations are still in the chemistry-driven stance. If you really want to see a compare and contrast to this, pull a sample out of your field and walk 3 feet out of the field into that shallow ditch filled with brome and stick a probe in that and run both of them. You will see a ratio of 5 to 1 where the brome is growing, and you'll see a ratio anywhere from 1.5, which is pretty good, all the way down to 0.2 to 1. 0.2 to 1 means 5 times more nitrate in the system than there is protein. One of them is efficient, the other one is not overly efficient. And I promise we'll talk about how that efficiency adds up for you. We are going to calculate how much of this soluble protein is going to be released through the microbes. And how much of it's going to be left over, reserved. Now, here's the magic in this one. Do I want there to be a reserve, or do I want there to be a maximum release?
Yes.
Yes. Good answer. What this tells me is this. We cap this credit to be absolutely no higher than what we measured right here. I do not care if your soil respiration is 800. I do not care if your C-Dan ratio is a perfect 10 to 1. I do not care if your water carbon is 800. We cap the credit at what we measure. And that's by design. Because the goal is to have some conservancy built in, much like you don't know what's going to happen in 2 months, 2 weeks. Hell, they can't even predict the forecast for 48 hours. So we don't want to overshoot the moon on this and say, hey, no, you're fine. Your respiration's 400. You don't need anything for nitrogen. That's not how that works. So if you said, well, how do I get this number to be higher? You've capped it out. It's as high as it can be. Well, it's as high as it can be because this is all we found. If you increase the amount of soluble protein in your system, and what do covers do, what does grazing do, that increases that soluble protein number, and guess what? Your credit potentially keeps going up. And you'll see it in a realized situation. If you've got a reserve, that's not necessarily bad. What it tells you is that if I wanted to get more out of that reserve pool, then I need to focus on either my carbon and nitrogen balance or respiration. I need to get more microbes eating more. The more they eat, the more they're going to kick nitrogen out. That makes sense? Okay. Everybody lost? Sleeping yet? Do I need to go stand by the speaker? Caleb.
I might miss it, but can you talk about what ratios let you know if you're a more biologically driven system versus chemically driven system? You're talking about the ratio between organic and inorganic and
Yeah.
okay.
So the question was, can you talk about the ratios that you can look at to tell if you're in a more biology-driven system or a chemically-driven system? The main one is that organic in to inorganic in ratio. Now keep in mind, during the growing season, you know, if you just went out and side dressed corn or top dressed wheat and then pull a sample, that ratio is going to be all out of whack. And it doesn't necessarily indicate that your system's being driven chemically, because you've got a high uptake time of nutrients. That's an okay thing. Mostly it's outside of the growing season. Much like a stock nitrate test at the end of the year, you know, that's when you're looking at it. Pre-plant, pre-application, or post-harvest is when you're really looking at that number. Don't panic if you're at tassel on corn and you're like, well, I got a lot of nitrate out here, that's a bad thing. Well, no, not if your corn's sucking it up and taking it, right? We can look a little bit at the phosphorus number as well. Caleb, it's back here. So much like nitrogen, we measure total phosphorus, total soluble phosphorus. We're going to measure plant available, that's phosphate. And what's left over is what we call organic P. Organic phosphorus is just all the other phosphorus compounds that are soluble and floating around in the soil, but not yet available to your plant. They're not in phosphate form. But the microbes convert them to phosphate. These are your phosphorus solubilizers. So you've seen a lot. I don't know if anybody anywhere in the country sells biological products. That's a joke. Everybody sells at least 5, right? But they talk a lot about phosphorus solubilizers, potassium solubilizers, and I'm not saying they work or don't work, but that's what you're looking at. Those microbes are going to eat this and release it. And you might look at that and go, well, what value is 5 parts per million? Almost 6. Does anybody know how much phosphorus fertilizer it takes to raise your soil test by 1 part per million? Nitrate, it's 1 to 1, right? Pretty close, 18. On average, it's 18 pounds of P2O5 fertilizer to increase that soil test. I don't care if it's Malick 3 extraction, Olsen extraction, but to raise that up by 1 part per million, it takes around 18 pounds of phosphorus fertilizer. Why? Nitrogen is soluble, phosphate is not. So that's why it takes so much. And that's why so many people say, well, I put 200 pounds on, but where is it? I didn't see it. My soil test didn't change much. Where it all. No question.
So do you make a differentiation for orthophos?
This is colorimetric right here. So that's what you're referring to as orthophosphate.
Like I apply orthophos.
Okay.
Is it truly more utilizable by the plants than putting on, say, 1030?
Okay, so the question is orthophosphate more readily available to the plant versus something like 1034?
I'd say the plant just has to work less to extract.
Yeah, and I would say the microbes have to work less to provide it.
Right.
Yeah, same concept. So Bryce said, he goes, the plants have to work less to get it because it's already in.
I apply
Yeah.
a lot less ortho than I would if I was putting on 1034.
Yes.
Plus,
So,
not the same, but it's a lot less.
yes, so one of them is a little more efficient in its use or uptake versus the other.
Right.
And
Price per pound is probably not Different, but it's
cost
the
per acre
efficiency.
doesn't vary a lot, I
Yeah.
just put a lot less material.
Yeah, using less, but getting the efficiency out of it. Yeah.
So I take your recommendation, and I cut it way back.
Sure. Yeah, because we're doing it as pounds of P205, traditional,
Exactly.
yeah, map or, yeah. Okay, so then we get to this nitrogen comparison box. Traditional nitrogen measurements on a soil test are nitrate. Measure nitrate, tell you how much nitrate you have. You convert it from parts per million to pounds per acre. If you don't know how to do that, it is the value in parts per million, so in this case, 18.5 times 0.3 times the depth in inches. So if you are 0 to 6 inch sample, it's 6 times 0.3, and that equals 1.8, and you multiply that by 18.5, and you get your number. In this example, it was an 8 inch sample, so you take 8 times 0.3 and you get a factor of 2.4. And 2.4 times 18.5, hopefully, if you do the math, is 44.4. Most of us have heard the adage, take parts per million times 2. That's close if you're in between 6 and 8 inches on depth. That number came from the old plow pan layer, which was 6.67 inches. If you take 6.67 times 0.3, you get a factor of 2. That's the shorthand method. The lab can't do that because you people in Kansas like 10-inch samples. And in Iowa, they like 6, and in Nebraska, we do 8. Well, 10 times 0.3 is 3. And, we want to give you credit for the depth. Nitrogen is equated on a volume measurement, so depth is important. So this is your credit on this example in pounds per acre of nitrate. Now we do the same equation when we do the Haney test. It includes nitrate and ammonium and this organic nitrogen release. So we take 18.5 times plus 3.2 plus 29.1 times 0.3 times 6 or 8 or 10. I think we can all understand the difference. And, this is high now because at the time nitrogen was pushing $1 a pound.
It's come down.
I was told it has. I don't know how to buy it. But if you want to, we're doing this for, like I said, people all over the country. So if you want to do your own economics and work that into the things Bryce was talking about, look at what product you're buying, what the cost is, multiply that unit cost on a per pound basis, and you can get your savings. Nothing overly fancy on the math. It's just we're showing that there because we want people to kind of hit them in the face and go, whoa. Multiply that out across, 1,500 acres, 2,000 acres, and pretty soon you're going, that's a big economic change potentially on my farm, right? So, how do we come up with that? Release credit. We're going to look at the respiration. We're going to look at the C to N ratio, the balance between energy and protein, right? And if those things are balanced, it's going to lead to that highest overall release. But again, it's capped at what we measure. So if you're not happy with the credit, if you've maxed it out, then we need to increase the amount of protein in the system. If you've got a reserve and you're not happy about it, odds are we need to look at the ratio here and the respiration. Quick word, well, I'll talk about it in a little bit. So this is how we make recommendations. I show the compare and contrast between the conventional method and I say the regen method. You tell us what crop you're going to grow, what your yield goal is. This is why Bryce said it's important to understand what a realistic yield goal is and work some of those numbers out. I've had people say, I want a recommendation for the highest yield possible. I said, okay. Well, last time I checked, the highest yield ever on corn was 600 and some bushels. It is possible. Somebody's done it. So do you want me to produce a recommendation at 660 bushel corn in your farm in eastern Colorado? Or western Kansas? Right? You ever seen how much wheat they grow in Ukraine? First time somebody sent me a soil sample from Ukraine and said, I want something like 260 kilograms per hectare. I'm like, oh, okay. I ran the numbers, did the conversion, and I go, that's like 180 bushels an acre. I was like, I can't do math. I go back and redo it. I walked into Dr. Ray Ward's office. Most of you know Dr. Ward. And I walked into his office. I said, Ray, help me out. I said, I don't understand this. And he goes, no, you did the math right. The thing you don't understand is that they grow a lot of wheat in Ukraine. I said, oh, okay. It's possible. Do you want me to give you a recommendation for 180 bushel wheat? You don't even grow wheat, but when you did, right? So have a realistic yield goal. We take that yield goal and your crop, and that determines the total amount of nutrient required. Now, those are not numbers that I decide. Those come from IPNI mostly, the International Plant Nutrition Institute, or they come from university research labs. Of course, K-State, Iowa State, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, they're all going to argue, and they stand in a circle and punch each other to argue about how much nitrogen it takes to grow corn. But that's what's happening. They all have their opinions, and they have their research to back up their claim. You get your credit from the soil test. If you grew a past crop, we'll give you a credit from a past crop. Soybeans, some people agree with it, some people don't. That's why we put it on the report. If you don't like it, add it back in. If you think it's not enough, subtract out what you think the number should be. Subsoil nitrate test. I do not recommend running subsoil tests for a Haney test. The tests are too darn expensive. And if you're trying to manage nitrogen as part of your goal, then run the $6 subsoil nitrate test. There's not a lot of microbial mineralization down there. Does it happen? Yes. Will it get better as your soils get healthier? Yes. Is it still economically impactful enough to justify the cost of the test? Probably not. I would say 99% of the time, no. Irrigation water credit. We got enough nitrate in our irrigation water at home that I could beat your yields with nothing. Because they can pump unlimited water, and they're pumping 9 pounds of nitrate on every inch of water they apply. Average guy's pumping 26 inches of water, 220 pounds of nitrogen, 230 pounds of nitrogen.
That's what reduced my yield.
Yeah.
Water to
Yeah, that's right. We sucked all the nitrate out of your water.
We'll see it.
Do it. We'll defend it. Yeah, you can't drink it. We do the exact same thing over here. The only thing that's different is we give you credit for ammonium and we give you credit for this. And yes, your past crop credit can also be a cover crop credit. I don't know what I just did there. Okay, so I'm using corn as an example. 200 bushel corn, 220 pounds of nitrogen required. We use a factor of 1.1 pounds per bushel. Everyone says, where did you get 1.1 from? The University of Nebraska-Lincoln uses 1.1. We use 1.1. That way when they scream at me and say, you made all this up, it's all gibberish, I said, no, you made it up and we followed you. We use 1.1. We're going to say you need 220 at that yield goal. We subtract out these 44 pounds here. We subtract this out over here. And in this example, I should have taken this cover crop test out because there was a cover crop test with this example. So forget that for a second. 220 minus 44, we're recommending 176. If I said 220 and I added back in, I used 80 on the cover crop, is what I ended up using. If we add that back in, we would end up with a recommendation of around 100. Remember, the difference was 77 pounds. So take 77 off of this and your recommendation is 100 pounds. Okay? I show you that because there's a lot of moving pieces in there. The data will show you what we feel confident you can do. Everybody has their own level of certainty. And that's true of traditional soil tests as well, right? You have your own comfort. And I've had people go from both extremes. 1.1 pounds for corn, you're out of your mind. How about 1.4? And I've got other people going, we're using 0.5. And you're only going to give me credit for the above ground biomass on a plant tissue or on a cover crop test. You're only going to give me credit for the amount I measured. No, I'm putting up, everybody's different. So when we show this report, oh, there was the slide I was looking for. It's a different one. I put two of them in there. When we show this report, it's hard to see down here. This is your recommendation piece. It says this is the crop you're going to grow. This is the yield goal you told us. This is your past crop credit. This is your subsoil credit. This is your Haney test credit. We put the credits on the report because that way you can look at them and say, I don't necessarily agree that I'm going to get 40 pounds of nitrogen out of my soybean crop from last year. And yes, I've had people say I'm going to get 0, and I've had other people say I'm going to get 80. You know why? Because the guy in Canada grew a bin buster soybean crop of 12 bushels, and the guy in Georgia produced 100. There's no way for the lab to sit down and account for all of those variables. So we just throw it out in the open and try to explain where the numbers are coming from, and then you get to play with those. Now, I'm going to get into some examples. And before I do this, I want to throw up a disclaimer. These are real results. They were shared. I was allowed to talk about them at this conference. They're not from my lab. And I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not here to say that if you're going to run these, you need to run them with us. But I get sent reports from other labs on a weekly basis. And I'm asked to look at them, I'm asked to interpret them. My job today is to help go through and broaden your understanding of the Haney test and how to look at it. This is the challenge that I'm up against and you are up against. So, there are other labs out there that quote unquote run the Haney test. They run parts of it, they leave parts out, they add things to it, they don't do calculations correctly, etc., etc. We are trying to put a stop to that. If you're going to call it the Haney test, you got to do it the way Rick runs it. And I can say this out loud, that we're working on patenting the name Haney test. And the reason I can say that out loud is because the only way you can patent anything with the name of somebody else is to get their permission, and I'm not too worried about another lab convincing Rick Haney to let them carry the patent with his name on it. But I want to point out why this is so darn confusing. So up here, we've got a soil health score. Assuming that is the Haney test soil health score, which I have, by the way, I have visited this lab personally over a dozen times. I have been in this place, I have tried to work, and I've gone through it, so I'm not just throwing mud. But it's confusing, even worse than what we laid out, because look at the units of measure. Okay, percent. I know what that is. pH doesn't have units. Here's CEC. We know what that is. Water extractable organic carbon divided by CEC, and we got parts per million. And that's very high, apparently. I have never seen a scale. I've never seen any of those numbers. I do not know where that is coming from. I have no concept of how they're getting that value. Soluble salts, no units. Here's HT3. By the way, HT3 is the soil respiration instrument name. So when Rick developed the instrument to measure soil respiration, he called it HT1. He built the first one. Rick sold them one of these machines, and then I sold them one of them later. They call it HT1, or HT3. Parts per million what? There's no unit. I mean, it's CO2-C, right? No units. VAST, that stands for Volumetric Aggregate Stability Test. It is a camera that takes a picture on a target to look at aggregate. It was developed out of Woods and Lab. Estimated bacteria to fungi ratio. There's not a single measure of bacteria or fungi on this test. I do not know where that comes from. No clue. I don't know if they're tasting the soil or seriously. But we get over here and the only thing we see, so this is all their phosphorus numbers. Now, they have organic and inorganic and total. Those are H3A extraction values. They label those as H3A. And they do give you an available P2O5 in pounds. And they've got a P saturation. P saturation to what? I do not know. Phosphorus rating 3.8. Again, I don't know what these are, but the reason I want to show you, this is where things get really hairy. So, these are all in pounds, parts per million pounds. Okay. Here's what I want to show you. This is surface nitrate. They did not run a subsoil nitrate, so the total nitrate is the same. The water nitrate is the same. Ammonium, 46 pounds. I can tell you exactly what's going on in that. 46 pounds of ammonium means that the sample was cloudy. H3A version 3 produced cloudy samples. H3A version 4, which was published in 2017, was an iteration, a change to remove the cloudiness. Now, when you're doing colorimetric tests, and by the way, when you do ammonium, the color you get is an orangish color. If you're in the Dakotas pulling a sample and you send that in and you've got any clay in that soil whatsoever, can anybody tell me what color it's going to be when it's cloudy? It's orange-ish. And you get false positives. And I know this because it took me almost 7 months working with Rick doing side-by-side comparisons to figure out that his extract was different. This was years ago because he updated the extract and I had the old extract and we were trying to implement the test years ago and everything matched except for ammonium. All of my ammonium numbers were falsely elevated high. That's when he finally published. I said, wait a minute, you've had this different version and you haven't told anybody? So he finally published it. Skip this ratio, doesn't matter. Carbon to nitrogen ratio 2.1. This is where things get really fun. Bacteria cells have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of almost 3:1. Corn at maturity is 80:1. Soybeans 25:1. Wheat 80:1. Wood 300:1. Even the simplest amino acid does not have a C/N ratio of 2 to 1. What is scarier is that when you calculate the C/N ratio, water extractable organic carbon divided by organic nitrogen. Somebody punch this in. What is 311.7 divided by 272.4? Thank you. 272.4. What'd you get? 1.14? So not only is 2.1 completely not possible, if you do the math, 311 divided by 272 isn't even 2.1. Again, I'm saying this, I've met these people. They're good people. They have good intentions. But this is why when you look at some of this information and you say, interpret this, what does this mean? Doesn't mean anything. Right? In order to have an organic nitrogen number of 272.4, this was a 6-inch soil sample according to the paperwork. I cut some of that off at the top. So back calculate. 272 divided by 0.3 is around 920. Divide that by 6. Organic nitrogen is somewhere in the 140 to 150 parts per million range. I've seen that once. Once. And by the way, the water extractable organic carbon on that sample was over 1,000. To make that, and guess what the ratio was? About 9 to 1. A little bit protein rich, but not 1.1 or 2.1. This is where, the reason I show this is because this is where we get into trouble, because here's what number matters to you the most, is what is my nitrogen credit from this? 209 pounds of nitrogen credit from the microbes. Add that to the 75 pounds of nitrate and the 46 pounds of ammonium, and you've got over 300 pounds of nitrogen out there. You've got an organic matter of 3.2, not terrible. Your respiration is 31. How are you supposed to mineralize all of that nitrogen when you microbes aren't eating it? Right? These rankings, we are very high. Not even close, not high enough. Because if that C to N ratio is truly 2.1, your WEOC is very, very low. That's your carbon. Remember, we want that ratio up to 10 to 1. So you need to multiply this number times 5 to get a balanced ratio of 10 to 1. I believe the WEOC number way before I believe the organic nitrogen number. Way before. That does not happen. I don't care how much manure you put on, how much cover crops you planted, how much chicken litter you've used. It will not be that high. Hate to burst your bubble, it just won't be. And then we've got a whole bunch of these potassium numbers over here and a bunch of calcium numbers over here. And what's super confusing about it is, here's potassium, 466 parts per million. Is that Mele-Curie extraction? Ammonium acetate? I have no idea. Can't interpret it if you don't know. Here's your K number from H3A. Total K, XRF. X-ray fractometry. What is XRF? Do you know, Candy? Is that right? X-ray fractometry. Okay. I don't know if this is like supposed to be the equivalency of the total nutrient digest test. But they've got a huge problem if this number in K is triple the number of calcium. but the base sat is where they want it, or close to it. So there's a lot of numbers. This is all one report. There's 3 pages. They do the same thing with iron and aluminum. I can tell you right now, your soil is not short of either iron or aluminum, period. All soils have copious amounts of iron and aluminum. The third thing they're going to have is silica. pH is going to determine solubility of iron and aluminum. It's not a shortage. And they've got your base saturation over here in magnesium numbers. Excuse me, actually, here's the 4th page of this report. Silica, yeah, I told you silica would be high, 550,000. Aluminum and iron. You've got this smattering of, here's sulfur 2 different ways, 3 different ways. You've got this smattering of numbers. And it's supposed to be a Haney test that's been thrown in with some conventional stuff. And then some of it, honestly, is just kind of, hey, let's pick 2 numbers and then make a ratio out of them and put that on the report. And I see this a lot. This is essentially the equivalent of the moron approach. When it comes to fertilizer, if you're not happy with what you're looking at, put more on. If you're looking at a soil test and you're not happy, justify it by just putting more numbers on the report. And yes, I know, you go back to my lame report, there's no fancy colors, there's no graphs. The reason for that is because there's no way for me to tell you that your respiration is low or high outside of the extremes. It's one of my biggest pet peeves in soil science is how many of you have seen a table for phosphorus and it says from 0 to 5, very low, 5 to 10, low. Have you seen those? Okay. Low for what? Now again, if you're at 2 parts per million, I don't care what crop you're growing and I don't care where you're located in the country, odds are that's low, right? But if I'm in, I know we're here in Kansas, but if I'm in central Illinois and I'm averaging 260, 270 bushel corn and I got a Malic 3, I don't care the extract, Malic 3 phosphorus number that says 20 parts per million. I look at a table, it says adequate. Even under conventional agronomy, that is not adequate for the yield. A lab would generate a recommendation. But if you go out to eastern Colorado and you say, well, I can get 70 bushel corn on a great year, well, that 20 part per million is now high. It's more than adequate for your environment and what you can do. Take corn out and say, well, what table do I look at if I'm growing potatoes versus alfalfa versus soybeans versus millet? It's one of the challenges with putting rankings on all of those different things in a report. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe it was just the one, right? Maybe it was just one, numbers got crossed. In this example, this is a better example, meaning here's my respiration at 70 instead of 30. My soil health score jumps to 12.3. Yes, all the labels are the same, and then I get over here and I said, okay, here's 2.7 again. Well, that can't be right. 333 divided by 218 is not 2.7, it's 1.4, somewhere in that ballpark. We've got the same issue, except this time, here's 272 pounds of potential organic nitrogen credit. They're giving 209 of that. Here's my organic nitrogen possibility, 218. How much credit am I going to give? 250. Okay. Again, I'm giving you this as a word of caution, and I hope that when you, honestly, if you choose to run these and you send them anywhere, that you can at least walk away with enough knowledge to sit back and don't drink it all in at once and just quickly look at a couple of these numbers and say, does this math? Because it's not complicated math. And if the answer is no, then call the people that ran it and ask them to make it math. And if they can't make it math, then my suggestion is you might want to move on. It's not, I get this all the time, it's not that the test itself doesn't work. Nothing works if you don't do it correctly, right? I'm sorry to say this, but you cannot always blame John Deere for a poor corn stand. Sometimes there's a little bit of operator error. Not in this room, but I mean, if you let me drive one, I will show you operator error. And you will want that planter insured to the gills. Here are a couple, and this is getting towards the end here, and I have no idea what time it is, but these are a couple of examples. Again, people in the group, people in this room, and I want to compare and contrast these. Now, I know those numbers are a little hard to read. I could not chop this one all up fast enough. But this sample was taken, and this is important, this sample was taken in April 16th, and yes, it is from Kansas. I said, well, Kansas is a big state. And I said, well, I can tell you the town, but that still doesn't mean I know where it is. I do know where Beloit is. I drive through it all the time. Probably not that far from here. How far are you, Chad? 30 minutes? 30 miles? Okay. So here we are. Now everybody knows it's yours, Chad, sorry. Sue me. Get in line behind Bryce. Yeah. So again, we see this. Here's nitrate, ammonium. We look at this. Now this is a good number right here. Organic N to inorganic N ratio. Actually, you know what? Let me stop. I told you to start with the soil health score. Soil health score, 8.5. Okay? Can this number be influenced by environment? Yes. That irritates most people. Let me tell you why you should not be irritated by that. You are measuring a living system. The only time a living system stops changing is when it's dead. Okay? If the numbers are completely static all the time, you have a dead system. So, soil health score, above 8 or above 7, okay, that's good. We're on the right track. What can I do to make it higher? I look over because I know this score is a little low. I go, oh, my respiration's 24.4. My carbon is 219. My percent MAC is 11. That's a low percent MAC, right? Is it a lack of food that is stopping these microbes from eating? We got plenty of food. pH 7.4, good. Soluble salts, good. Potassium, good. I'm not overloaded with nitrate, or my soluble salts would be through the roof. I've got, I'd be like, okay, I might see a little response from zinc, from the microbes again, copper maybe. Phosphorus, probably. A little bit of phosphorus. Now, there's one factor, and I alluded to it a minute ago, environment. What is happening at this time in April? What's going on with soil temperature? We're starting to go, right? But we're a little early, and I love the fact that we've got this example. I'm guessing this one is not too far from where Chad and Jennifer are. But here's what's funny. Nitrate, 11.8. 11.1. We're going to compare and contrast these. I've got a soil health score that jumped from 8 to 12.5. And no, it would have been awesome. I didn't think of this. It would have been awesome if these were right off the same field, just a month apart. But we're going to still, because these are close enough in properties, we can talk about it. They jumped. Respiration went from 24 to 84. My organic carbon, which was higher on Chad soil, dropped on this one to 150. What happens when the microbes eat? What happens to the balance of your bank account when you start writing checks? It goes down. Our percent MAC has climbed. I still have the same 7.4 pH. I got a little higher soluble salts, but I've got similar potassium, 93 to 85, similar calcium, mag, zinc still down here, copper still down here, right? Phosphorus is still in that below 5 range. So what in the world made this difference in respiration, soil health? Temperature. Most likely temperature, and it can be moisture as well. Moisture?
What's the date? 520.
520. Moisture. Okay. Mother Nature still plays a pretty big role in what we do, right? It plays a big role in how we interpret these things as well. But I like this, and this is what some of you have seen this. So this is soil respiration on an entire year, starting January 1st through the end of the year, December 31st. That first sample was pulled or sent and analyzed at the lab around April 17th. Right about here. Respiration on this is, this is an average, again, of thousands of samples. Respiration was around 20. A month later, right, we were getting into May 20th. We're out here. That part of that curve is called the exponential growth curve. Microbes are replicating very quickly, and they are coming out of quote-unquote slumber and just trying to ramp up. How fast they ramp up is limited by all of those things we discussed earlier. Food, pH, soluble salt. But that's why that was an awesome compare and contrast, because we didn't have a pH of 8.2 and 6.8, right? They're the same pH. And ironically, here's the carbon. So right here, we're April. Carbon is kind of peaking, right? The microbes start ramping up, and then carbon starts to plummet. The sample we got in May was right here, and you saw that. Respiration goes up, this one comes down. The soil health score was designed in a way by Rick to be self-balancing. In other words, we know if one thing goes up, some things are going to come down. And I mentioned this balance. So I'm almost done here. The question always comes and says, well, where do I start? If I'm looking at this, the first thing to start with is the organic C to N ratio. If that ratio is out of whack, that is the first place to start. When the C to N ratio gets above 20 to 1, there is zero credit for nitrogen movement. Now, if you want a real-world example of this, I'll pick on Iowa. Iowa fell in love with cover crops about 6 years ago. I told them to drop the S off of crops because they only use one, and it's cereal rye. And they would go grow cereal rye, and they would grow it this tall, and they'd roll it down, and then they would scream, alleliopathy, alleliopathy, my corn is dying. No. Most of the time, not the case. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Most of the time, not the case. It is nitrogen tie-up. You've got a crop that you terminated at 60 to 1 C to N ratio. You go put on 80, 100, 200 units, I don't care. The microbial mafia takes up a whole bunch of that nitrogen to access carbon because they don't have any protein in that rice straw. And then your corn looks terrible, and they go put more nitrogen on, and then we have watershed problems because that nitrogen gets released again later in the growing season. Corn doesn't need it, or it doesn't need all of it at that point, and whatever's left is supposed to sit there because guess what they're not going to do after that experience? Grow rye again. So the nitrogen sits there until it rains and hits the tile line, and there you go. We run into this scenario all the time. Ideally, we want this between, I said 10 to 1 to 12 to 1. Anything between 8 and 15 is acceptable. The higher it goes. So, I had a friend of mine who called me one day and he said, Lance, I was in high school, 16. He turned 16, he called me up and he said, Lance, this is a true story. He goes, my dad gave me a car. I said, whoa, what car? He goes, he gave me the bed. Well, lucky you. He says, you should see how fast this thing goes. Come over here. I got over there. We start looking at it. And I said, well, let's go, man. I mean, this thing was immaculate. Shiny, seats are nice. I mean, pulled the cover off of it. I said, let's go for a ride. And he says, well, the engine don't run. I said, well, then I can tell you how fast it goes. As fast as you're willing to push it. I'm riding the front seat. We can't be concerned with how far we can push the system. How high can my respiration be? How high can my carbon be? How much nitrogen credit do I get? Until you make the engine run. You gotta have that first. It's gotta start, it's gotta go. And this is a table showing you some of the ramifications of this. So we say above 20 to 1, poor ranking, too much carbon and or not enough organic nitrogen, however you want to look at it. What's the implication for nitrogen? Tie-up. No credit given from that water extractable organic pool, from the protein. Whatever protein is there, the microbes are going to keep the nitrogen. Again, what happens to the composition of manure when you change from a super high protein food to a really high fiber food, right? Less is mineralized out the back end, or more, depending on which way you're going. This is marginal. You're going to get some nitrogen tie-up, slower mineralization, lower end credit, good, ideal, and poor. We get down to this side, which we do see. I have a gentleman that I worked with for a little while in South Dakota who I visited his farm, and his soil looked exactly like this floor. I mean, consistency and color and cracks. And I asked him what he's been doing. He says, well, I've been no-till for 27 years. Great. And he says, for the last 15 years, I've been planting soybeans. I said, which year? He said, all of them. And I'm not poking fun. I asked him, I said, why would you want to do that? And he told me, he said, my aspiration as a young farmer was always to be a corn and bean farmer. And until 15 years ago, we couldn't grow soybeans in South Dakota. He goes, I'm making up for lost time. That is totally fine. Do with it what you want, but when you ask me why you're seeing the issues you're having, that soil still had the lowest water-soluble carbon to nitrogen ratio I've ever seen, and it was 6 to 1. His organic matter had gone backwards by nearly 2% in those 15 years. His structure collapsed. It ate itself, right? So I have seen it too low. Most of us, if we have a problem, we're up in here in this range because we grow a lot of high carbon crops, and I'm not trying to scare anyone from high carbon crops. We have to supply carbon, we have to grow these crops, but there is a balance to it. Do not panic and think that if you grow a high carbon crop and you've got a high carbon cover crop, that your seed-in ratio is going to go from 12 to 1 to 30 to 1 overnight. That's not how this works. It takes years. I've seen 34 years continuous corn, and the seed-in ratios are 20 to 1. It didn't happen because they grew corn for 2 years in a row. Okay? Respiration. Here's some of your interpretation on respiration. 0 to 10, very low. I do not care where you are in the country, that is very low. Over 200, very high. It, again, does not matter what you're growing and where you are. You'll notice that there's not an average in here. I use fancy terms like just slightly below or a little above, because there is no true average that I can place on the country. Again, might be frustrating. What you're really looking for is change on your operation over time. Consistency in sampling is key for that. And these are some implications and different things you can do. It is not the end-all be-all list. And I'm happy to send these to Jennifer or anyone else in the group, and they can go out. We have an interpretation guide on Haney. These are in there. Oh, that was it. I thought I had one other one. So with that, I again have no idea what time it is. Feels like 10:30 p.m. Yeah. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. Jennifer really was hoping that I would stop talking and allow you to talk. I told you there'd be 0 questions, Haney. None. Oh, you ruined it for me.
I
Yeah.
ruined it for you. So I've been using ammonium sulfate as a water conditioner when I run my sprayer. I think it also weed killer. And I keep pushing that. Like if I run 3 passes on my soybeans, the first 2, I'll run 1.5 pounds per acre of ammonium sulfate. On that last one, I want to kill those weeds, I'll run 3. Am I going to wreck something doing that?
So the question.
My soil test always call for sulfur.
Sure.
I apply sulfur.
So the question was, or the statement was, I'm using ammonium sulfate in my spray tank for effectiveness on herbicide. Whether I'm using 1 pound of ammonium sulfate per acre or 3, depending on the weed pressure and time of year, am I causing harm doing that? My response to you is harm to what? The plants or the microbes or both? Where do you want me to go?
Soil health.
Your soil health. At that rate, no. To your soil health, no. The thing I caution, well, not from the ammonium sulfate. I can't speak to the herbicide completely because the problem with herbicides is that some microbes eat them. It is a food source. Some microbes are killed by them. Some are neutral to them. And so, that's always a hard one to answer. The ammonium sulfate, however, no. At 3 pounds to the acre like that, no, you're not harming anything as long as it's not burning your plants. As far as the soil goes, yeah, it's not high enough to that. But as far as the soil goes, no. Doing no harm. We used to get free sulfur.
I know, out of the air.
Yeah, we used to get free sulfur out of the air. The Clean Air Act took care of most of that. There are still parts of the country, though, that if you ever see where you're out in the country and you see a train crossing, go across the road, stop at that train crossing, don't stop on it, next to it, and look at the color of your corn, milo, wheat, whatever it is, as you move away from the train track. And it was from the burning of coal and the sulfur that was coming off the train. So we are seeing more and more recommendations for sulfur. all the time. It is something that is limiting, so you're not hurting anything there, especially at those levels. One other thing I'll mention that could be a benefit, not only to your pocketbook, but also to soil health, assuming that a herbicide is causing some damage, well, if you can get by with less herbicide that is now more effective because of that, then, yeah. I did the same thing. Not farming, of course, but I had an acre and a half in front of my house that was all brome. I think actually I called Candy and was like, how do I convert this to, this was years ago, it's like, how do I convert this to native flowers and grasses? Well, I had to take care of the brome. And a guy would come in and hay it. And when he hayed it, he took the top 1/10 of an inch of soil with it every time. And I told him, I said, we're not going to hay it anymore. And I let it grow back, and when I went and sprayed it, yes, I sprayed it with glyphosate, and I put ammonium sulfate in because I know my water's high pH, high carbonate, and that's what you're neutralizing in that to help make that water more effective. And I smoked it. And then planted a 20-way mix the next spring, let it grow all year, and I had people banging my door down saying, do you want me to harvest your milo? No, fine. Let it go.
So sampling timing, obviously fall, spring, behind the crop, ahead of the crop, how often, what,
Yeah,
getting
so,
started, ongoing, how you do all that.
yeah, so sample timing. Sample timing is going to depend a little bit about what you're hoping to manage or do with the data, okay? So, there's generally two scenarios. One of them is to track and observe soil health metrics alone, and you're not using the test really to make management decisions from a fertility standpoint. If that is your goal, then typically we are talking mid-spring through early summer is your best time. The soils have warmed up a little. We have not gotten into those dog days of summer. Or fall up until, well, it depends on the year, but up until through Halloween, so following harvest. Whichever one of those you decide to use, stick with it. It doesn't necessarily mean the date. I've got a lot of people say, well, I pulled samples on May 3rd, I got to pull them on May 3rd. No, I graduated one year on May 4th, and it was 104 degrees in Kearney, Nebraska. You know, the next year I think it was 60. So we had snow on April 20th. But consistency is key. If you're trying to go the other route and you're interested in the soil health numbers, but you're really wanting to try to manage nitrogen, obviously that coincides with the application. So a couple weeks before you need to have a decision made, it takes 2 days for our lab to run the test. No idea on the rest of them. If we receive a sample on a Monday, Wednesday afternoon, you will have the results for the Haney test. Thursday is the only caveat because farmers work harder than everybody else, and I can't convince everybody to come in and work on Saturday to read back your results. So you'll get those. Thursday and Tuesday.
If you're just looking at soil health primarily, in crop versus out of crop,
Yeah, so
fitting it into a rotation.
yeah, so you can do if soil health is your game, then you're better off doing it while you have something growing. Now, for people that are fallow up until planting, then you want, if you're in corn, you're talking getting that up to V3, V4 leaf stage, soybeans, kind of that same range. For those of you in winter wheat, you'll want to come in after the wheat has broken dormancy, a couple weeks after the broken dormancy. Give it a chance to get going, but definitely before it reaches that head maturity and starts to shut off. Yes, that might mean you're sampling earlier in the year, but again, in your wheat, as long as you're comparing wheat on wheat and looking at those numbers, that works. You can make those comparisons pretty easily. We do have some that use this for top dress on wheat or side dress on corn, milo. They are pulling an in-season sample. You're getting nitrate. All of those fancy side dress soil tests, they're just nitrate tests. The only thing that's different is they take a nitrogen uptake curve. So when they make a side dress recommendation, obviously before I told you corn at 200 bushels requires 220 units in, right? So pre-plant, that's what the corn needs. At V3, if you measure from there, the corn needs 200 because it's already used 20. And at V8, it needs 180, or whatever. So that's all they do is say, what stage is your corn at or your wheat at? You've already used 60% of the total you need. You need the other 40, and let's subtract out the credit from your soil test. And then that's how much you side dress. So when we do recommendations in season, because guess what? When you receive soil samples every single day, some of which are from Oregon, some are from Florida, I have no clue what growth stage your crop is in. So if you want a recommendation, that's usually a, hey, what leaf stage are you at? I mean, they're harvesting corn in Texas in June this year. So that's how we make that recommendation. But we do have a lot of people using that, starting to use it for that. That help?
Yeah, for sure.
Caleb.
What do you consider subsoil? Like at what level? Is there any benefit to doing like a 0 to 6 and a 6 to 12 with the Haney?
Yeah, so what do you consider subsoil? From a pure testing perspective, subsoil is anything below the depth you want to measure. So if you run a 0 to 6 and then you pulled a 6 to 24, 6 to 24 is your subsoil. Obviously, from a soil horizon perspective, it's going to change all over the place. So the second part of his question was, is there any benefit doing a 0 to 6, 6 to 12 Haney? Yes, but not below 12. 12 is where I tell everybody just stop. And I have had researchers from all over, or different companies. I mean, I've seen 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 24, 24 to 36, 36 to 48. And I've had a few all the way down to 96. Once you get past that 12 inches, they all look the same and they all look terrible. Except for the fertility piece. The fertility piece will change, but the respiration piece, all of that, it's a waste of money. You can do it one of two ways. If you want to know, you can do a straight 0 to 12. You don't have to add anything to that. If you are interested, though, about how your 0 to 6 is different from your 6 to 12, you would pull those separately. And then, yes, nitrogen, you can add them together. Okay? You simply add those credits together. If you've got 30 pounds here and you've got 20 pounds here, add them together. And I have had so many people flat tell, I just had a call last week, guy goes, well, the University of Minnesota told me I can't add them together. And I said, why? And he said, well, because the Haney test is that way. And I said, their standard recommendation is a 0 to 6, 6 to 24. They add them together. It's the same thing. Exactly the same thing. You can't do that with exchangeable nutrients. Potassium, calcium. It's an average. So if you've got 3,000 calcium here and 1,500 here, well, guess what would have happened if we would have ran them together? 3,000 gets diluted by 1,500. And so it is an average of 4,500, not a sum.
So
And we have a lot of people doing 0 to 6, 6 to 12 for that reason. They're interested in it. Keep in mind that it's an extra analysis, right? So it's double the cost. And if you're not looking at it to manage it differently, you can run just a 0 to 12. I've got a lot of bills to pay, but I'm not afraid of telling people, hey, this is completely worthless for you based on what you're trying to do. So.
Yeah, related to the timing of the testing, if there's fields where you're just trying to get the initial test, like a baseline test, and say it would be a fall, like this fall, putting in a nice cover crop mix that might be an early fall planted now after corn. Would it be better to wait for that cover crop to get up and test in October? You said that window for fall, and
Yeah.
test after that cover crop is established.
Yes, there's going to be, there's going to be an overall delay, right? So it's not like, oh, if my cover crop's this tall, I missed my opportunity to measure my baseline. If this is the first time you're putting this in, it's not like, oh my gosh, my respiration would have been 30, now it's 180 because it takes longer. So you can go out when that is established. Just do it before the soils get really cold, right? And then again, consistency then is key.
So then next year, if it was in soybeans, but you're trying to transition into the later dry mix or whatever,
Mhm.
you'd still try to take that Haney test in early October or late September.
Correct.
Same time, and
Yep.
have what's going on.
Yep. And the reason for that is because temperature and moisture influence respiration, things like that, much more than just carbon availability, root exudates, etc. For every 10 degrees you increase soil temperature, you double microbial activity up to around 103 degrees, and then it just starts to plummet.
Yeah, so related to that then, are these tests designed so that you would be testing every year? Again, I suppose it's related to what you're managing for. You're trying to manage your fertility. How do then the fall tests compare to the spring tests?
Yeah, so again, if you're managing your fertility, it'll depend on your application timing. If you're fall applying, you test in the fall. If you're spring applying, you're testing in the spring. If you're doing a split application where it's like, well, I'm going to put some on in the fall, I'm going to put the rest of it on the spring, well, put on what you're going to put on in the fall, but until you fill the rest of the bucket up, that's when you measure and figure out what you've got, and then you'll know how much you need to fill the bucket up. So you test the spring. Should you do them every year? Using those same two scenarios about tracking soil health or managing nutrients, I generally tell people if you're managing nutrients, nitrogen is the primary one that is the economic savings using this test. So if you're in a corn bean rotation, I'm recommending every other year ahead of corn, right? If you know you're not going to put in on soybeans, I wouldn't worry about it. Again, if that's what you're using it for. When it comes to soil health, the answer generally depends on management intensity. So Dr. Dwayne Beck up at Pier, he always said that, management intensity needs to equal environmental intensity. What he means by that is don't try to outpace your environment, right? There's a reason we don't grow oranges here. So when it comes to soil health, and say your sampling intensity needs to match your management intensity. If all you're going to change, let's say that you decide you want to make a change, you want to establish your baseline year one, and then you're going to park the tillage equipment, and everything else stays status quo, there's no reason to sample that every 3-4 years. If you go the opposite direction and you say, I'm going to park the tillage equipment, I'm putting a 60-way mix out here, I'm calling everybody with 4 different kinds of livestock, I'm not recommending you necessarily do all that, but if that's what you're going to do, sample every year. Because we've seen that the intensity at which you're doing this is going to drive, within the environment, going to drive how quickly you might see change. And, you know, I could restrict my calorie intake by 30 calories a day, but I don't need to step on a scale every single day and take a measurement because it's not going to change very fast. Right? Same idea. Gunderson.
Know a few people puttering around trying adding sugar and stuff with some of their fertility practices. Have you seen any data come in that shows any benefit of that, any differences with that, or?
Yeah, so the idea of adding sugars or molasses, things like that into a fertility program. I don't read research data because I don't think most of it really has a lot of applicable practice on the farm. I have a lot of anecdotal data from farmers that are doing it. Here's what I will say about it. If your goal is to, I've had people say this to me, I'm going to use humic acids, I'm going to use fulvic acids, I'm going to use molasses, I'm going to use milk, I'm going to use orange juice. Why? And they say, because I'm going to feed the microbes and I'm going to increase my soil organic matter. Wrong. You can't add enough of that stuff. So 1 ton of soil organic matter is 1% soil organic matter is 12,000 pounds of carbon. I don't care if that jug of humic acid that weighs 13 pounds is 100% carbon. Can't do it, right? However, they can be a good jumper, they bridge a gap. And so the biggest gap, remember the slide I showed you as respiration goes up, carbon's coming down? Then did you see where carbon starts to come back up? When those crops get established, they start to pump carbon back into the soil. That's that carbon number coming back up. At the end of the year, a corn crop will put 50% of all the carbon it captures through photosynthesis, it will pump into the soil through the roots. Sorghum Sudan's up closer to 70%. If you want a great biological priming crop, Sorghum Sudan. But those crops are not going to pump a lot of carbon into the soil when there are seedlings for 2 reasons. You got 2 leaves sticking out here like this. How much sunlight are you capturing? Not much. And what sunlight you do capture, what do you need it for? Establishment, right? And growth. Self-preservation on corn up through V3. After that, it starts to feed the system back. So where those sugars and things can come into play is when you are in furrow. I would never tell you to broadcast apply those. But if you're doing that as a seed treatment, not seed treatment, but an in furrow or a 2x2 band type thing, yes, you're adding a little bit of a carbon source. So instead of just adding a vitamin to the system, now you're adding a food source as well. Because until that root structure gets out to feed the microbes, they're going to utilize that. So I have seen positive responses. Again, I can't tell you to go read this paper from such and such university, probably because whoever funded that research sells the product, but I do hear it all the time from growers that are playing with that more. It's a good question. There's all kinds of stuff out there. Any other, you don't even have to ask a question. If you just got something you want to yell at me about, or, oh, listen.
If you're putting a perennial in for a few years in your rotation, when would be the best time to put that food test and see where you're going? At the beginning and then take it back out?
Yeah, so the question was, if you're putting a perennial in as part of your rotation, when would be the best time to run the Haney test, before or at taking out? Depending on how long you're planning on leaving the perennial in that rotation, I would say definitely before, but not again for at least 3 years. Because most perennials are going to take, 2 to 3 years to really get moving. And perennials, unlike annuals, I mentioned corn is self-preserving up until, V3, and then it's going to start feeding back into the system. Perennials, it's more like a couple of years. And in the long run, they do more, but short term, they're in it for the long haul. So they've got to really get established before they start going back into the system. Corn and soybeans, they have the same goal of every organism: acquire as many resources as fast as humanly possible to reproduce before I die. They've got 4 months, 5 months. So perennials are going, I got years. So they're a little slower moving. Yeah, cool.
Let's go back to I can't say it.
Soluble salts?
That's a kind of a rough estimate of fertility. What ranges do you like to see there?
So the question was, if soluble salts is kind of an estimate of overall soil fertility, what ranges do you like to see? For almost every crop out there, if you are below 1, you will not have yield drag. So I like to see it at 0.2 or above, but less than 1. Okay? There are wheat, I mentioned wheat. Corn will tolerate it above 1, not a lot, but you'll start to see a yield drag. What it is it stimulates drought stress. So high soluble salts means that the plant can't get water in. Certain crops and certain plants are much more efficient at higher soluble salts. Barley is one of them, sugar beets is another one, and if you really want to watch something grow in high soluble salts, plant kochia. Yeah. Example of that, in the Dakotas, they have what's called saline seeds. I know some of you may be familiar with that, and maybe you have them on your farm in spots, but they're pretty prevalent up there. And the way of managing those saline seeds is, they've been doing this for 30, 40, 50 years, is they go out every spring, they till them, they till the whole farm, but they till them 3 or 4 times, they plant wheat through them, the wheat fails, the kochia starts to grow, they spray it, 2 weeks later they spray it, 2 weeks later they spray it. At this point they're hoping that the wheat's mature and it gets cold enough to kill the kochia. It's not, they spray it, and then they come in and they harvest wheat. And every year those saline spots get just a little bit bigger. I had a younger farmer up there, farms 30,000 acres by Antler, North Dakota. Antler, North Dakota, you can throw a rock into Canada going north, and you can throw a rock into Montana going west. And I was talking to him, and much like most of the producers up there, they have livestock, and they've got big herds of livestock. And I said, have you considered not tilling that area? Not saying don't till the farm if that's what you want to do, but I said don't till that area, stay away from it, don't plant through it, plant your wheat, and when the kochia grows, you're already driving a spray rig through your wheat to get out there, cut yourself an alley, fence it off, let the cattle graze it. And he said, why would I do that? And I said, kochia carries a relative feed value similar to alfalfa if you graze it at the right time. I said, even better, go out there, this is one time, I said, go out there, swath it, bale it, haul it out of it. Because you're accumulating salts in those plants, get them out of there, take them back out. He bale grazed anyway. I said, take them back out away from there, roll them out, and graze them. He did that for 3 years, and he was able to produce wheat in 80% of his saline spots across 30,000 acres. Was it bin buster wheat? No, but his grandfather looked at him and said, I have been farming this land with you for 60 years, and we've never produced a single bushel of wheat in those spots, but every year they planted wheat. So, There are ways to manage those soluble salts. There's crops that will tolerate them. All right. I gotta be quiet.